Who sold my wife's piano while I was fighting to survive? Cesare Moretti froze in the silent mansion as Ellie Bellini stood beside the empty space where Sophia's piano had been, holding her mother's old hairpin and pointing to the bare floor. Valentina smiled calmly and said it was only an old instrument removed for his piece. But Ellie whispered, "They erased Mommy's piano." While the old sales contract and a deep scratch on the stone floor waited silently nearby. 3 hours earlier, the Moretti mansion had looked exactly the way Cesare remembered it. The same marble floors, the same black walls, the same portraits watching over the family empire. But when Cesare returned from the hospital after 3 weeks away, something felt wrong before anyone spoke. The room smelled different, not like Sophia's lavender perfume that had remained faintly in the curtains for years, not like the old wood polish used by the previous staff. This was a sharper scent. New flowers, new furniture, a new life placed over an old one. Cesare stood near the doorway while Valentina welcomed him home with both hands around his arm. She looked perfect, elegant, calm, the woman who had visited him every day in the hospital. "I thought you would appreciate the changes," she said softly. "You needed a fresh beginning." Cesare said nothing. His eyes moved across the room. The painting above the fireplace was still there. The antique table was still there. But the corner near the window was empty. That corner had belonged to Sophia. Every night, before Cesare became the man everyone feared, he had sat there and listened to his wife play the piano. Before the casinos, before the enemies, before the family wars, that sound was the one place where he felt like an ordinary man. Now there was only polished stone. Ellie stood several feet away, holding herself still. She was only 9 years old, wearing the simple dress she wore when helping her mother around the mansion years before. She was not trying to interrupt. She was not trying to accuse anyone. She was looking at the empty space like someone had removed a piece of the world. "Mr. Cesare," she said quietly. Everyone turned. Valentina's expression changed for less than a second. Tiny movement, almost invisible, but Cesare noticed. "Yes, Ellie?" The girl looked down at the floor. "They moved Mommy's piano." Valentina gave a gentle laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, you probably don't understand. That piano was old. It was taking up space." Ellie looked back at her. No, the room became quieter. Ellie was not angry. That was what made it uncomfortable. "Mommy said nobody should move it." Cesare looked at the empty corner again. "You are sure?" Ellie nodded. "I remember." Those two words stayed in the room. Not because they sounded powerful, because they sounded true. Valentina stepped forward. "Cesare, she is a child. She was attached to the memories, not the object. I handled everything while you were recovering." While you were recovering. The words landed differently. Cesare noticed something he had not noticed before. The piano was gone during the exact time he was unable to protect his own house. He looked toward Marco, the new estate manager. "Who authorized the removal?" Marco adjusted his jacket. "I followed Mrs. Moretti's instructions. The paperwork was completed." Paperwork. A word Cesare trusted. A word people used when they wanted something to look clean. Ellie slowly walked toward the empty space. She did not touch anything. She simply pointed near the wall where a small mark remained beneath the fresh polish. "Mommy always told me not to forget this."
Cesare stepped closer.
A thin scratch crossed the stone. Most people would never notice it. But Cesare remembered, because Sophia had once told him. Small things are where people hide big mistakes. He stared at the mark, then at Valentina. For the first time since returning home, he felt something colder than anger. Doubt. And on the floor beneath where Sophia's piano had stood, Cesare noticed a tiny piece of black wood that no one had cleaned away. Cesare Moretti kept staring at the small piece of black wood on the floor. It was barely larger than a fingernail, almost invisible beneath the shine of the marble. But he had spent his entire life learning that the smallest details were often the ones that people tried hardest to hide. He slowly bent down and picked it up. Valentina watched him, not with fear, with calculation. "You are really going to investigate a piece of wood?" she asked softly. Her voice was gentle, almost wounded. That was what made it dangerous. Cesare had spent decades around people who lied loudly. The dangerous ones were the people who lied while smiling. He placed the piece of wood on his palm and looked at Marco, the new estate manager. Who removed the piano? Marco answered immediately. Mrs. Moretti authorized it. Too quickly.
Cesare noticed.
Who moved it?
Marco paused.
Only for a moment. But a moment was enough. The removal company. And who hired them? Marco looked toward Valentina. The room became still. Valentina stepped forward before Marco could answer. Cesare, please. You just came home. You spent weeks in a hospital bed. The last thing you need is to interrogate staff over an old piano. Old piano. The words were simple. But Cesare felt something tighten inside him, because Sofia had never called it old. Nobody who knew Sofia called it old. It was the piano she played when they had nothing. The piano she played when Cesare came home angry. The piano she played when she wanted to remind him that there was still a person beneath the reputation. Ellie stood quietly near the doorway. She watched Valentina carefully, not like a child watching an adult, like someone watching a door that might suddenly open. Ellie, Cesare said. The girl looked up. When did you last see the piano? She thought before answering. 2 nights before you came home. And after that? Ellie lowered her eyes. I heard wheels. Marco shifted slightly. Valentina smiled. Children hear many things at night. Ellie looked at the floor. I know what I heard. Her voice was quiet, not disrespectful, not challenging, just certain. Cesare looked at her. What did you hear? A cart. A pause. 3 people. The room changed. Valentina's expression remained calm, but her fingers tightened around the ring on her hand.
Cesare noticed.
3 people. Ellie nodded. One person was wearing the shoes that make the hallway sound loud. Marco looked down, almost unconsciously. Cesare noticed that, too. A few minutes later, Cesare walked alone through the west hallway. He did not bring his guards. He did not announce what he was doing. He simply observed. The mansion had always been built around control. Every camera, every door, every employee entrance, everything had a record. He stopped in front of the security panel. The screen showed the hallway footage from the night the piano disappeared. Except there was a gap. 7 minutes missing. Not 7 hours. Not an obvious mistake. 7 minutes. The kind of mistake someone hoped nobody would notice. Cesare touched the screen once. Who deleted this? The security employee standing nearby swallowed. I don't know, sir. Cesare looked at him. The man immediately corrected himself. I mean, I was not informed. Not informed. Another careful phrase. Another wall built with words. Later that evening, Ellie sat at the small kitchen table with a glass of milk in front of her. For a brief moment, she looked like any 9-year-old child. Not a witness. Not someone caught between powerful adults. Just a little girl missing her mother. Cesare stood nearby. Why didn't you tell anyone before? Ellie traced a small circle on the table with her finger. I tried. To who? The housekeeper. And she told me not to make trouble. Cesare looked away, because that answer hurt more than anger. Ellie was not saying nobody cared. She was saying she learned nobody would listen. Then she reached into her pocket and placed something on the table. A small folded piece of paper. Cesare opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten list of dates, written in a child's handwriting. What is this? Ellie looked at him. The days people came into Mommy's room after she was gone. Cesari's expression changed, because the first date on the list was not after he returned from the hospital. It was the day Valentina moved into the mansion. Cesare Moretti stared at the handwritten list on the kitchen table. The dates were uneven, written with the careful handwriting of a child trying to make every number clear. They were not accusations. They were memories. Small moments Ellie had collected because nobody else thought they mattered. He looked at the first date again. The day Valentina moved into the mansion. The day Sophia's room started changing. "Why did you write these down?" Cesare asked. Ellie looked at the folded paper. "Because Mommy said if something feels wrong, remember the details." Cesare remained silent. He had built an empire by remembering details. Numbers, names, weaknesses. But he had never imagined a 9-year-old girl had been doing the same thing inside his own home. The next morning, Cesare asked his private attorney to quietly review the estate records. No calls.
No confrontation. No accusations.
Just information. While the attorney worked, Cesare returned to the west hallway where Sophia's old room remained untouched. Or at least that was what everyone claimed. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, everything looked arranged. Too arranged. The books were aligned perfectly. The curtains were freshly cleaned. The air smelled like expensive perfume. Not Sophia's perfume. Someone else's. Cesare walked slowly around the room. He did not touch anything at first. He watched. On the edge of the desk sat a small decorative box. It was not where Sophia used to keep it. He knew because he had given it to her himself. He opened it. Empty. Ellie appeared quietly at the doorway. "That was Mommy's," she said. Cesare turned. "What was inside?" Ellie hesitated. "A little paper." "What paper?" "She wrote things she didn't want to forget." Cesare looked back at the empty box. "Did you see it after she died?" Ellie nodded. "Before they changed the room." A cold feeling moved through him. "Who changed it?" Ellie looked toward the hallway. She lowered her voice. "Mrs. Moretti said it was time to clean away things that made you sad." The words sounded innocent. But Cesare had heard thousands of excuses from people trying to hide something. He walked back into the hallway and found Marco near the staircase. "The room was cleaned after Sophia died?" Cesare asked. Marco straightened immediately. "Only normal housekeeping, sir." "Normal housekeeping removes personal items?"
Marco hesitated.
Mrs. Moretti wanted the room prepared. Prepared for what? Marco opened his mouth, then stopped. "Small mistake. A crack. For the future," he finally said. Cesare looked at him for a long moment. The answer was too polished, too rehearsed. Later that afternoon, the attorney sent the first report. There was a record of the piano sale. There was also something else. A receipt from a private restoration company. The date was 2 days before the piano was officially sold. Cesare read it twice. The restoration was not requested by the buyer. It was requested by the Moretti estate. He looked at the document again. Someone had paid to inspect the piano before selling it. Ellie saw the paper in his hand and slowly stepped closer. "That's why they didn't move it right away," she said. Cesare looked at her. "Why?" Ellie pointed at the receipt. "Because they were looking for something." For the first time, Cesare did not dismiss the thought. He did not accept it blindly either. He simply placed the receipt beside the old piece of black wood from the floor. 2 small things. 2 details nobody else cared about. But together they created a pattern. That evening, Valentina entered his office carrying tea. She smiled warmly. "You've been working too much already." Cesare noticed something. Her sleeve was slightly pulled back. A faint mark from a security access bracelet was visible on her wrist. When she saw him looking, she immediately adjusted the sleeve. "Something wrong?" she asked. Cesare shook his head. "No, but after she left, he checked the estate access records. The first unusual entry was not from the night the piano disappeared. It was from 3 days earlier. The same night someone opened Sophia's room at 11:47 p.m. The access log remained open on Cesare Moretti's screen long after the room had gone quiet. 11:47 p.m. Sophia's room. 3 days before the piano disappeared. Cesare looked at the time again, then at the receipt from the restoration company sitting beside it. The same date, the same night. Someone had entered the room before anyone admitted there was a reason to search it. The next morning, Cesare called everyone connected to the piano sale into the private study. Not a meeting, not an accusation, a question. That was how Cesare handled problems when he wanted the truth. Valentina arrived first, dressed perfectly, carrying herself like the woman who had held his hand through every hospital visit. Marco stood near the door. The estate attorney sat with the paperwork. Even the restoration company representative joined through a private video call. Ellie stood quietly beside a chair at the edge of the room, holding the folded receipt she had found near the piano records. She was the smallest person there. Everyone knew it, and everyone treated her like it. Perhaps we should avoid making this more confusing than it needs to be, Valentina said gently. Ellie is remembering emotions, not facts. The attorney nodded slightly. Children often connect memories with objects. That does not mean there was wrongdoing. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody insulted her. That was what made it worse. The room was polite, controlled. Powerful adults explaining why a child should not be believed. Ellie lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked back at Cesare. I know what I heard. Valentina smiled sadly. Sweetheart, nobody is saying you are lying. Ellie tightened her hand around the receipt. You are saying I don't know. The room became still. Cesare looked at the girl. Not because of the words, because of the way she said them.
No anger. No desperation.
Just a simple correction. What did you hear? Cesare asked. Ellie took a breath. A cart moving, then a door opening, then someone saying, check the back before it leaves. Marco's expression changed slightly. That could mean anything, he said quickly. Furniture movers inspect items all the time. Cesare looked at him. Did they? Marco stopped. Did they inspect the piano? Cesare asked again. The room waited. Marco glanced toward Valentina for half a second. It was almost nothing, but Cesare saw it. I would have to check, Marco answered. Then check now. 10 minutes later, the restoration company sent over the original service report. The representative on the screen cleared his throat. The piano was inspected before transport. By request of whom? Cesare asked. The man looked down at his file. The Moretti estate. Valentina remained calm. Of course. Wanted to know if it could be restored before selling it. Cesare looked at her. You told me it was removed because it was old. A brief silence followed. Valentina recovered quickly. It was old, Cesare. Both things can be true. It was a reasonable answer. A normal person might have accepted it. But Cesare was not looking for a normal explanation anymore. He was looking for the moment where explanations became too carefully arranged. Ellie stepped closer to the desk. She pointed at the service report. That is not the right time. The attorney looked at her. Excuse me? Ellie pointed again. The piano was moved after midnight. But this says the inspection happened at 8:15 p.m. Everyone looked at the paper. The room changed. The attorney leaned forward. How would you know the time? Ellie answered quietly. Because Mommy's hallway clock was broken. It always stopped at 12:03. I heard the cart after the clock stopped. Nobody spoke. It was not a perfect explanation. It was a child's memory. But it matched something nobody expected her to know. Cesare looked at the report, then at the access log, then at the receipt. 3 different records, 3 different times, and 1 impossible gap. Valentina reached for the paper. This proves nothing. Her voice was still calm, still controlled, but her fingers moved too quickly.
Cesare noticed.
He took the report before she could touch it. No, he said quietly. It proves something. Valentina looked at him. What? Cesare turned the paper around. At the bottom corner was a small notation from the restoration company. A second inspection request had been entered and then cancelled. The request came from an employee access code, Marco's code, but the cancellation time was after the piano had already left the mansion. The room stayed silent after Cesare Moretti read the notation at the bottom of the restoration report. A second inspection request. A cancellation. Marco's access code. A timeline that did not match the story everyone had repeated. Marco stood near the door, his expression carefully controlled. It was an administrative error, he said. Nothing more. Cesare did not answer. He simply placed the paper on the desk and looked at the 3 pieces of evidence in front of him. The receipt, the access log, the service report. 3 ordinary documents. 3 small cracks in a wall that had been built to look perfect. "Leave the room," Cesare finally said. Everyone froze. Not because he raised his voice. Because he did not. The calm was worse. Marco left first. Valentina stayed a moment longer. "Cesare, you are letting a child's fear create suspicion inside your own home." Her words sounded concerned. Almost loving. Cesare looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "I am letting facts create questions." That was the first time Valentina had no immediate answer. After she left, Cesare closed the study door and called his attorney. "No one touches these documents again," he said. "Make copies. Secure the originals. I want every transfer record connected to the piano." The attorney nodded. "And the piano itself?" Cesare looked toward the empty corner visible through the open doorway. "Find it." Hours later, Ellie waited outside the study. She held the same small notebook she carried everywhere. When Cesare opened the door, she looked up. "Did I make trouble?" she asked. The question stopped him. Not because it was unexpected, because it revealed something much bigger. A child who had seen something wrong was not asking if she was right. She was asking if telling the truth was a mistake. Cesare lowered himself slightly so they were at the same height.
No, egli.
He paused. "You noticed something people wanted ignored." Ellie looked down at her notebook. "Mommy said people sometimes hide things by making you feel small." Cesare remembered Sophia saying something similar years ago. Not those exact words, but the same meaning. Sophia had always believed the easiest person to silence was the person nobody considered important. "What else do you remember?" he asked. Ellie opened the notebook carefully. Inside were small drawings, dates, and notes written in a child's handwriting. She turned to a page near the back. "This." Cesare looked down. It was a drawing of the piano. Not the front, the back panel. A small rectangle marked behind the wood. "Why did you draw this?" he asked. Ellie touched the page. "Because Mommy showed me once." Cesare looked up. "She showed you?" Ellie nodded. "She told me never to open it. She said if something happened, the piano would remember for her." For several seconds, Cesare said nothing. The words sounded impossible. But the child's face did not show imagination. It showed memory. He asked Ellie to stay where she was while he called security. Not because he doubted her. Because he understood the importance of protecting what came next. The piano was located the following morning at a private restoration warehouse outside the city. The buyer had not destroyed it. He had kept it untouched, exactly as requested. When the piano arrived back at the Moretti mansion, Cesare did not allow anyone to crowd around it. He documented every step. Photographs, timestamps, witnesses. The chain of custody mattered. Secrets disappeared when too many people handled them. Ellie stood nearby as the back panel was carefully removed. Behind the old wood was a space no one had noticed for years. Inside was a small metal box wrapped in faded cloth. Ellie reached for Cesare's sleeve but did not step forward. She knew this was his decision. Cesare looked at the box for a long moment. The cloth carried Sophia's handwriting. His fingers stopped, because he recognized the way she wrote one single word on the corner. His name. Inside the box was a key, a USB drive, and a sealed envelope. Cesare opened the envelope last. The first line was enough to change his expression. It was Sophia's handwriting. "Cesare, if you are reading this, do not trust the people who tell you I left without a fight." He stared at the sentence. Then he looked toward the hallway where Valentina had stood only hours earlier, defending the decision to remove the piano. For the first time since returning home, Cesare did not wonder whether someone had made a mistake. He wondered who had been protecting the mistake from being discovered. Cesare Moretti read Sophia's letter 3 times before he allowed himself to move. The room around him disappeared for a moment. The voices outside the study, the footsteps in the hallway, the quiet movement of staff returning to their duties. None of it mattered. Only Sophia's handwriting remained in front of him. The woman he had buried in his memories was speaking again, not with anger, but with a warning she had carried alone. If you are reading this, do not trust the people who tell you I left without a fight. Cesare placed the letter down carefully. He did not tear it. He did not crush it. He treated it like evidence, because that was what it was. He turned to his attorney. Copy everything. The letter, the drive, the box, every photograph. Nobody handles the originals except us. The attorney nodded. Do you believe Sophia knew something? Cesare looked toward the piano sitting quietly in the corner of the room. I believe she was afraid of something. The USB drive was opened in a secure office away from the rest of the mansion. No employees, no staff.
No, Valentina.
The first files were financial records, transfers between companies, payments hidden behind ordinary business names. At first glance, nothing looked illegal. That was the problem. Everything looked normal. Cesare leaned closer as the attorney explained the pattern. These payments are structured to avoid attention. Small amounts, different accounts, different dates. How long? Cesare asked. The attorney hesitated. Almost 2 years. 2 years. The words stayed in the room. For 2 years, someone had been moving pieces around him while he believed his own house was secure. Then they opened the audio file. Static filled the speakers. A few seconds passed. Then Sophia's voice appeared. Older recordings always sounded different. More fragile. More distant. But Cesare knew her voice instantly. I don't know who I can trust anymore. The room became still. Sophia continued. If something happens to me, Cesare will believe the paperwork before he believes his own instincts. That is what they are counting on. Cesare closed his eyes. Because she was right. He had built his entire life around systems, contracts, rules, loyalty. He had trusted the structure around him because he believed betrayal would come from outside, not from inside the walls of his own home. Later that night, rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows of the mansion. The lights were dim. Ellie sat at the table with a bowl of soup, listening to the old clock above the doorway tick between seconds. For a few minutes, there was no investigation, no family war, no empire, just a child eating dinner and a man realizing how much silence had filled his house. Cesare sat across from her. Ellie, she looked up. Did Mommy ever tell you who she was afraid of? Ellie shook her head. No, she thought carefully. Mommy didn't like saying names when she was scared. What did she do instead? Ellie touched her small notebook. She wrote things down. Cesare looked at the notebook. Why didn't you give this to me before? Ellie lowered her eyes. Because everyone said grown-up problems should stay with grown-ups. A painful silence followed. But Mommy said the truth belongs to everyone. Cesare looked away for a moment. Not because he was angry, because he understood what those words meant. The next morning, he quietly reopened old personnel records. He checked staff access. He checked financial approvals. He checked every person who had been near Sophia's room after her death. Then one record stopped him. A security report from months after Sophia died. A request to replace the camera outside her room. The request had been approved by Valentina. The reason listed was simple. Privacy improvement. Cesare stared at the document. Privacy. A reasonable word. A harmless word. A word that hid the removal of the one thing that could have shown who entered Sophia's room after midnight. He asked his attorney one question. Who approved this without telling me? The attorney looked through the file and answered quietly. You did. Cesare looked confused. No, the attorney turned the page. There was his signature. His real signature. From a stack of hospital documents brought to him while he was recovering. He had signed without reading. Cesare sat back slowly. For the first time, the enemy did not look like someone standing across from him. It looked like someone who had learned exactly how to use his trust against him. And as he stared at the signature on the page, Cesare realized the person he had spent years protecting was the Same person who had been watching his blind spots the entire time. Cesare Moretti looked at his own signature on the document for a long time. The ink was his. The handwriting was his. But the decision behind it no longer felt like his. Someone had placed a paper in front of a recovering man. Someone who had just survived a serious medical crisis and used his trust as the final lock on a door they wanted to keep closed. He folded the document carefully and handed it back to his attorney. "Nobody knows we found this," he said. The attorney understood immediately. "Not even Mrs. Moretti?" Cesare looked toward the window overlooking the mansion grounds. "Especially not her." For the first time since returning home, Cesare stopped trying to understand what happened. He started preparing for what came next. The next several days were quiet, almost too quiet. Valentina continued acting like nothing had changed. She brought him coffee in the morning. She asked about his health. She spoke gently about the future of the estate. To anyone watching from outside, she was the devoted wife standing beside a recovering husband. But Cesare was no longer watching the surface. He was watching the pauses, the moments before answers, the way people moved when they thought nobody was looking. He created a simple test. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would reveal his intentions. He told Valentina that he planned to sell the old west wing of the mansion because maintaining unused rooms was unnecessary. The statement was false. The west wing contained Sophia's old office and several family archives. Cesare wanted to see who reacted. Valentina barely moved. "That makes sense," she said. "Some memories are better left behind." The words were gentle, but they confirmed something. She was not surprised by the idea of removing another part of Sophia's presence. Later that afternoon, Cesare asked Marco to prepare a fake route document for a private transfer of the piano restoration files. The document contained a false location. Only 3 people received access.
Cesare.
His attorney, and Marco. That evening, Cesare sat in his study with Ellie while rain tapped against the glass. She was drawing quietly, not pictures of people, not pictures of the mansion. She was drawing the hallway clock from the west wing. "Why that clock?" Cesare asked. Ellie looked up. "Because people forget broken things." She pointed at the drawing. "But broken things still tell you something." Cesare studied the small drawing. The clock had stopped at 12:03, the same time she had mentioned before. A child's observation, a detail adults ignored, a detail that had now become a piece of the timeline. "Ellie," Cesare said carefully, "when people came into your mother's room, did you see anyone?" She shook her head. "No." Then she paused. "But I heard something." "What?" "A bracelet hitting the door handle." Cesare looked at her. "Whose bracelet?" Ellie thought. "The one Mrs. Moretti wears. The one that sounds like tiny bells." That night, security quietly reviewed the new camera footage. Nothing happened for hours. Then, at 1:18 a.m., a figure entered the west wing. The face was hidden, but the wrist was visible. A bracelet reflected under the hallway light. Cesare watched the footage without blinking. He did not celebrate. He did not react. He simply saved the file. The next morning, he invited Valentina and Marco into the dining room. On the table sat 3 items: a sealed envelope, the fake route document, and a glass of water nobody had touched. Valentina looked at the envelope. "What is this?" Cesare smiled slightly. "A question." He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was the false location he had created. "I wanted to see who would move first." Silence filled the room. Marco looked down. Valentina remained still. Too still. Then her phone vibrated on the table. Once, twice. She did not pick it up. Cesare looked at the screen. A message preview appeared before the phone went dark. Contained only 5 words. "The location has changed again." Nobody spoke, because nobody in the room had been told there was a location change. Cesare looked at Valentina, then at Marco, and for the first time they understood the truth. The little girl who had been standing alone beside an empty space in the mansion was no longer alone. She had given Cesare the one thing money and power could never buy. A reason to look closer. The dining room remained silent after Valentina's phone stopped vibrating. Nobody reached for it. Nobody asked who had sent the message. They all understood the same thing at the same time. Someone had reacted to information that only existed as a trap. Cesare Moretti sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. The old version of him would have demanded answers immediately. The man sitting there now did something more dangerous. He waited. "Marco," Cesare said quietly, "bring me the original piano sale contract."
Marcos Wallov.
The original? Yes. The room changed, because everyone understood there was a difference between a copy and the truth. 2 hours later, the Moretti family meeting room was filled with the people who had spent years benefiting from Cesari's name. The family attorney, senior advisors, security officials.
Marco.
Valentina. Nobody stood above anyone else. Nobody had control of the room anymore. On the table in front of Cesare were the pieces that had followed him back from the empty space where Sofia's piano once stood. The original sale contract, the restoration records, the security footage, Sofia's letter, the USB drive, and the small black piece of wood that started everything. Valentina looked at the collection and remained calm. "Cesare, this is unnecessary." Her voice was soft, almost disappointed. "You are turning a misunderstanding into a family crisis." Cesare looked at her. A misunderstanding does not require 7 minutes of missing camera footage. The room went still. The security director lowered his eyes. Cesare continued. "A misunderstanding does not require a restoration inspection before a sale." He placed the receipt on the table. "And a misunderstanding does not require someone to remove evidence from my own house." Valentina's expression barely changed, but her hand moved toward her ring. A small habit, a nervous habit. Ellie noticed. She always noticed. She stood beside Cesari's chair, holding her mother's notebook. She was not there to accuse anyone. She was there because she remembered the things everyone else ignored. "Mr. Cesare," Ellie said quietly. Everyone looked at her. The attorney opened his mouth as if to object, but Cesare raised one hand. "Let her speak." Ellie walked to the table and opened the notebook to a page with a small drawing of the piano room. "The camera was changed after Mommy's room was searched," she said. "But the old camera was still there for one night." The security director looked confused. "That is impossible." Ellie looked at him.
No.
The new one was installed outside the hallway. The old one was behind the painting. The room froze. Cesare looked at the security director. "Is that true?" The man hesitated, then slowly nodded. "There was an older backup system. Was it erased?" Cesare asked. The answer came after a long pause. "Someone tried." The attorney immediately requested the backup. Minutes later, the file appeared on the screen. The footage was damaged. Static covered most of it. But one thing remained clear. At 11:47 p.m., Valentina entered Sofia's room. She was carrying a small envelope. At 12:03 a.m., Marco entered after her. And at 12:16 a.m., the piano room door opened again. The person leaving was not a mover, not a restoration worker. It was Valentina. The room felt colder. Valentina stared at the screen. "That proves nothing." Cesare did not respond. He pressed play on another file from the USB drive. Sofia's recorded voice filled the room. "If you are hearing this, they found the things I hid. They will tell you I was confused. They will tell you I was emotional. Do not believe them." Cesare closed his eyes. For 1 second, the man who controlled an empire disappeared. There was only a husband listening to the woman he lost. Sofia's voice continued. "The person closest to you will use your loyalty against you." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Cesare looked down at the contract again. At his signature. At the documents he had trusted. At the years he had spent believing his house was protected because everyone inside knew his rules. Ellie looked at him quietly. "Mommy wasn't trying to hurt you." Cesare looked at her. What was she trying to do? Ellie held the notebook tighter. "She was trying to make sure you knew the truth," before someone made you forget it.
Cesare.
Looked back at Valentina, not with rage, not with revenge, with something colder, understanding. The woman who had stood beside him in the hospital. The woman who had spoken for him when he could not speak. The woman who claimed she was protecting him. She had been protecting something else. Cesare placed Sophia's letter on the table. Then he removed his glasses and looked at his attorney. "Call my attorney." The room went silent, because everyone knew what that meant. The family meeting was over. The investigation had begun. The words, "call my attorney," remained in the room long after Cesare Moretti left the table. No one moved immediately. The people who had spent years watching Cesare control every situation had just witnessed something different. He had not exploded. He had not threatened anyone. He had simply stopped protecting a lie. In the weeks that followed, the Moretti family empire changed quietly but completely. The evidence was transferred through proper legal channels. Every document was copied, sealed, and recorded. The original piano sale contract was preserved. The damaged security footage was secured. Sophia's letter, the USB drive, and the small metal box from inside the piano were placed into evidence storage with a complete chain of custody. The black piece of wood that started the investigation was kept in a glass case in Cesari's private archive. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Valentina Moretti was removed from every financial decision connected to the Moretti estate. Her access to accounts was frozen during the investigation. The legal team uncovered unauthorized transfers, false approvals, and hidden agreements designed to slowly move control away from Cesare while he was recovering. The matter did not disappear behind closed doors. The family board saw the evidence. The attorneys reviewed the records. The people who had trusted appearances over truth were forced to face what had happened inside their own walls. Marco cooperated after realizing Valentina had planned to let him carry the blame alone. His position as estate manager ended, and the records he helped hide became part of the official investigation. Valentina lost the image she had protected for years. The woman who presented herself as the person saving Cesare from painful memories became the person who had tried to erase them. But Cesare did not celebrate. That was the part people expected from him. They expected anger, revenge, a public destruction of everyone involved. Instead, he returned to the mansion and walked into the room where Sophia's piano had once stood empty. Ellie was there. She was holding her mother's notebook. "Is Mommy's name going to be okay now?" she asked. Cesare stopped. It was such a simple question, but it carried everything. Not money, not power, not punishment. A child was asking if the person she loved would finally be remembered correctly. "Yes," Cesare said. "It will." He made changes that had nothing to do with appearances. The employees who had been ignored for years received a formal process for reporting concerns without fear. Staff members were given legal protection through independent channels instead of having to rely only on the people who controlled the house. Ellie's family received a safe home, educational support, and proper legal protection. Cesare did not call it charity. He called it responsibility. He also corrected something that had bothered him more than any financial loss. Sophia's records were restored. Her contributions to the family's legitimate businesses were documented. Her name was no longer treated as a memory that needed to be carefully hidden. Months later, the piano returned to the mansion. It was not placed in a dark corner where people could walk past it. Cesare placed it in the center of the living room where everyone could see it. The same room where someone had tried to erase it. Ellie stood beside the piano, looking unsure. "I don't know how to play like Mommy," she said. Cesare smiled slightly. "You don't have to." He placed the old hairpin she carried beside Sophia's framed photograph on the piano. "You already did the part that mattered." That evening, the mansion felt different. Not because it was quieter, because it finally felt honest. There was a simple dinner in the kitchen, a warm plate waiting for Ellie, a full glass of milk beside her. No guards watching. No powerful people deciding what she was allowed to say. Before leaving, Ellie looked at Cesare and asked one question. "Will people listen now?" Cesare looked toward the piano, the photograph, and the small notebook that had started everything. He answered softly, "They will have to." And in a house built on power, the smallest voice had finally become the one nobody could ignore.